3 minutes ago, the golden facade of Buckingham Palace shattered the heavy veil of silence that had cloaked its corridors for months. Unleashing a statement that didn't just ripple through the United Kingdom, it sent seismic shockwaves hurtling across the entire world. From the bustling streets of New York to the ancient markets of Tokyo, from the sun-drenched beaches of Sydney to the fog-shrouded highlands of Edinburgh, King Charles III, the longest-serving heir-turned-reluctant monarch, has officially confirmed his abdication date. A monumental act so unprecedented in modern royal history that it eclipses even the abdications of Edward VII in 1936, when love for Wally Simpson tore the throne asunder, or the quiet retreats of earlier kings amid wars and scandals. And the most shocking revelation of all, buried in the fine print of that terse palace communique, reveals that the crown, that glittering, jewel-encrusted symbol of empire continuity and divine right, is already being meticulously prepared, polished, and positioned for Prince William, the once reluctant heir now thrust into the blinding spotlight of destiny. What cataclysmic forces, what hidden tempests brewing in the gilded halls of power led to this seismic shift that has left monarchists reeling, Republicans rejoicing, and the global media in a frenzy? Before we plunge deeper into the labyrinthine implications of what this truly means for the fractured royal family, for the unraveling threads of British tradition, and for the very future of the Commonwealth, I implore you, kindly hit that subscribe button right now so you never miss a single pulse-pounding update in this unfolding saga. Like this video to amplify the signal, drop your thoughts in the comments below and share it far and wide to spread the word. The words etched into that official statement were not merely formal, they were chillingly definitive, final, and utterly irreversible, carved in the unyielding stone of royal decree with no loopholes. No ambiguities, no room left for the speculation that has long fueled tabloid headlines and late-night palace whispers. King Charles is stepping down, not in some distant, hazy tomorrow, but on a date now etched into history's ledger, a moment that will be dissected by historians for generations. Cameras flashed like 1,000 lightning bolts across the iron gates of Buckingham Palace, reporters scrambled in a chaotic ballet of microphones and notepads, and the gathered crowd, tourists, loyalists, skeptics, gasped in unison, a collective intake of breath that echoed from Trafalgar Square to the distant shores of the Commonwealth realms. It wasn't just the raw announcement that stunned them, it was the exquisite timing, the somber tone, the air of inescapable finality that hung like a funeral pall over the scene. No one, not the most jaded royal watcher, not the sharpest political analyst, was prepared for a monarch to end his reign not with the pomp of a coronation. As Charles himself had endured just 4 years prior in 2023 amid pouring rain and global scrutiny, but with a quiet, devastating farewell that felt more like a surrender than a strategic retreat. Within minutes of the statement hitting the wires, images began circulating on social media feeds and news tickers worldwide, royal aides looking visibly shaken, their composed facades cracking under the weight of the unforeseen. One veteran official, who has loyally served under 3 monarchs, Elizabeth II, her son Charles, and now perhaps her grandson, was seen whispering hurriedly into a phone, his expression pale and tight, lips moving in frantic urgency as if conveying the end of an era to unseen powers. What was meant to be a simple, scripted statement release from the palace press office morphed instantaneously into an orchestrated palace-wide response operation. With courtiers mobilizing like soldiers in a silent war, phones ringing off the hook, secure lines buzzing with coded directives. While some onlookers outside the gates cheered at the tantalizing prospect of fresh energy injecting the monarchy through William, a modern, relatable figure with his environmental passions and family man image, others stood in stunned silence, hands clasped over mouths, eyes wide with disbelief at the unraveling of a lineage unbroken for over 1,000 years. Social media, that relentless digital coliseum, exploded into a maelstrom of speculation faster than a wildfire in dry grass. Was Charles secretly battling a grave illness, hidden from public view like so many royal ailments before? Was he forced out by shadowy palace forces or governmental pressures? Or had something far more personal, more intimately human, triggered this final, fateful decision that now reshapes the world's oldest continuous monarchy? There are now strong hints, gleaned from leaks and insider murmurs, that this move wasn't a bolt from the blue at all, but the culmination of a meticulously laid plan. Insiders, those anonymous voices who thrive in the penumbra of palace intrigue, point to telltale signs as early as last autumn of 2025, when cancelled trips to Commonwealth nations like Canada and Australia raised eyebrows, reduced public appearances at routine engagements like garden parties and investitures became the norm, and last-minute private meetings with Prince William and Princess Anne multiplied like storm clouds on the horizon. One former advisor, a silver-haired veteran of decades in royal service who spoke on condition of anonymity, even suggested the abdication plan had been under silent development for over 6 months. Crafted under immense pressure in smoke-filled backrooms, or rather discreet drawing rooms, negotiated in secrecy amid the clink of teacups and the rustle of classified documents. Whispers are now rising like fog from the Thames about underlying issues that have festered unchecked, matters of deteriorating health, profound emotional strain from a lifetime of waiting and now ruling, and deep-seated internal palace discord that has pitted family against family, tradition against modernity. Charles, ever the stoic figure known for carrying his burdens privately, like the long shadow of his parents' expectations or the public pillorying over his marriage to Diana, may have finally reached a breaking point where the weight of the crown, that metaphorical burden Queen Elizabeth once described as a job for life, became too much to bear alone. Some claim it wasn't just the relentless stress of duty, the endless ribbon cuttings, state visits amid geopolitical minefields, the ceaseless scrutiny from a voracious press, but a profound loneliness that gnawed at him, the isolation of a king surrounded by sycophants yet starved of true counsel. But what appeared to the outside world as a royal decision made in crystalline clarity may actually be the toxic product of months, perhaps years, of buried pressure building like steam in a sealed kettle, secret meetings convened under the cover of night, and a deeply fractured family legacy stretching back through divorces, exiles, and scandals that have tested the firm's resilience time and again. Hours before the public ever uttered the word abdication, or saw it splashed across front pages from the Times to the New York Times, Prince William was rushed under cover of darkness to a late-night briefing at Sandringham, the sprawling Norfolk estate where Queen Elizabeth spent her final hours in 2022. Its vast grounds now echoing with the gravity of another historic pivot. No staff accompanied him, no press shadowed his conv, just the heir apparent and the monarch, father and son, locked in a confrontation that would alter the course of royal destiny forevermore. It was well past midnight when William's Black Range Rover crunched to a halt on the gravel drive. The estate blanketed in an oppressive silence, broken only by the hoot of an owl and the distant crash of North Sea waves. Yet inside the main drawing room, with its heavy velvet curtains drawn against prying eyes and a fire crackling fitfully in the grate, the air was reportedly electric with tension. Thick enough to choke on, charged with the unspoken enormity of what was about to unfold. Charles was already waiting, alone at a polished mahogany table, his face gaunt in the lamplight, no advisors hovering in the wings, no bodyguards stationed at the doors, just a small, locked box on the table between them, its brass fittings gleaming ominously. What followed was not a casual conversation over brandy, not a fatherly chat about the weather or polo matches. It was a reckoning, raw and unrelenting, the kind that shatters illusions and forges fates. Charles, long known for his deliberation, his penchant for delay and consultation, like the endless environmental white papers he championed as Prince of Wales, didn't waste a single second on preamble. He slid a crisp manila envelope across the table's polished surface, bearing the handwritten legend, "For William only," in his distinctive looping script, and with a quiet but firm voice that brooked no dissent, began to speak words that would echo through history. Witnesses, what few there were, a trusted butler lingering in the hallway, and a night watchman stationed discreetly outside, later described hearing raised voices filtering through the oak-paneled door, muffled bursts of emotion that built like thunder. Some say the future king shouted in disbelief, his baritone cracking with the shock of acceleration. Others claim it was the anguished sound of a man wrestling with the eternal royal dichotomy of duty versus his own deeply human instincts. The pull of fatherhood against the inexorable march of monarchy. Charles was unyieldingly clear. The decision had already been made, sealed in ink and conscience, irreversible as the tides. "You must be ready by morning," he reportedly said, his eyes locking onto William's with the intensity of a dying star. There was no room for debate. No space for filial pleas or reasoned arguments. It It wasn't just a warning delivered in the witching hour, it was a command from a father who had waited 7 decades for the throne. A monarch confronting the limits of his time on it, and a man whose legacy now hinged on this handoff. Inside that fateful envelope, according to those intimately close to the family who had pieced together the puzzle from fragments, were handwritten instructions scrawled in Charles's trembling hand. A sealed statement destined for release post-abdication to explain his rationale to a stunned nation. And a meticulous list of protocols to be enacted within a razor-sharp 12-hour window, from constitutional notifications to Parliament to symbolic duties like the transfer of the royal signet ring. The weight of it all crashed down like an avalanche. Intricate constitutional procedures dating back to the Act of Settlement 1701, ceremonial duties steeped in medieval pageantry. Urgent political coordination with the Prime Minister and opposition leaders, all now plummeting onto William's broad shoulders before he even had time to catch his breath amid the whirlwind. But this midnight transfer wasn't just about cold structure and bureaucratic checklists, it was about legacy, raw and unfiltered. The passing of a scepter burdened not with glory alone but with unfinished wars, against climate change that Charles had long evangelized. Family fractures from the opera interview with Harry and Meghan to Andrew's Epstein-tainted exile. And a creeping public skepticism that polls had shown eroding support for the monarchy to its lowest in decades. William's reaction was far from immediate acceptance, a princely nod of quiet resolve. Palace insiders confirmed that his first response was profound hesitation. A visible pause where duty clashed with doubt. Not because he didn't see the gathering storm on the horizon. He had glimpsed the signs in his father's weary eyes during family Christmases at Sandringham, but because of who conspicuously wasn't in the room, whose absence loomed larger than any crown jewel. Catherine, the steadfast Princess of Wales, it's believed that William was furious she had been kept in the dark until the very last moment. Her exclusion, a calculated secrecy that ignited brotherly protectiveness, turned regal outrage. He reportedly questioned Charles with the intensity of a barrister in court, whether this was truly the right time amid global instability from Ukraine's war to Middle East flare-ups. Whether his family was emotionally fortified for the crown's unbearable weight, that relentless scrutiny that had already hounded his mother Diana to her tragic end. But Charles, his jaw set like the cliffs of Dover, wouldn't yield an inch, his resolve forged in the fires of inevitability. By dawn's first light piercing the Norfolk mist, William's entire schedule had been cleared by silent order from on high, public walkabouts cancelled, charity patronages paused. Even a planned virtual call with Earthshot Prize finalists scrubbed without explanation. Calls were made on encrypted lines to key aides across London, cars rerouted from Kensington Palace with engines humming in the pre-dawn chill. Aides instructed to prepare documentation they hadn't yet laid eyes on, stacks of red-sealed files on everything from nuclear codes access to diplomatic cables. It was as if a silent operation, dormant like a sleeping dragon, had been activated long ago in the palace's deepest vaults. Waiting only for this whispered code word from the king himself, abdicate, and once uttered, everything snapped into precise, inexorable motion. Gears grinding with the efficiency of a Swiss watchmaker. But while that midnight moment at Sandringham sealed the future in wax and whispers, the preceding months have been anything but a calm interlude of tea and tranquility behind the ornate royal gates. Behind the glittering grandeur of state dinners with presidents and prime ministers, behind the ritualized waving hands from balcony to adoring crowds on Trooping the Colour, stood a man quietly breaking under pressures that would crush lesser souls. Insiders, courtiers with decades of service, confidants who have mopped brows and drafted speeches, reveal a hidden crisis of such severity that it left King Charles with no viable choice but to step down from the throne he had chased for lifetime. But was it purely a matter of health, those vague allusions to personal reasons in the statement, or something far more damaging? A cocktail of scandals and stresses eroding the monarchy from within. For months leading into late 2025, something had been palpably off-kilter in the royal rhythm, a dissonance noted by those closest to the king in the intimate bubbles of Balmoral, Windsor, and Highgrove. Those innermost circles whispered of a growing fragility, not just the physical toll of age. Charles turned 77 in November 2025, his frame slimmer. Steps slower, but an emotional unraveling that manifested in subtle cracks, cancelled audiences with minor royals, withdrawn smiles at public events, hands trembling slightly when signing proclamations. At Balmoral, the Scottish Highland retreat, traditionally a sanctuary for the Windsors, where Elizabeth II found solace fishing the Dee and picnicking on heather-strewn hills. Aides reported an uncharacteristic silence enveloping Charles during his summer sojourns. Gone were the animated discussions on organic farming or watercolours, replaced by long, solitary walks along loch sides, staring into waters as if seeking answers in their depths. Then came the breaking point, the moment when whispers turned to alarms. According to a senior source embedded deep in the medical team, a physician who has attended the royals since the Queen's final years, the monarch suffered a full emotional breakdown behind the firmly closed doors of Balmoral Castle one stormy September evening in 2025. Shouting at no one in the empty drawing room, his voice echoing off tartan-draped walls, pacing for hours like a caged lion, footsteps thudding on ancient Persian rugs. Refusing trays of food sent up by concerned staff, roast grouse, his favorite, left untouched, and reportedly muttering through gritted teeth, "I can't carry it anymore, the weight, the eyes." The endless charade. It was there, in that historic Scottish retreat amid the purple bloom of heather and the cry of red kites overhead, that the hairline cracks in his resolve turned into a full, catastrophic collapse, the kind that no amount of royal stoicism could paper over. Royal doctors were summoned discreetly under the guise of a routine checkup, choppers landing on private helipads shrouded in mist. And what they observed in private consultation alarmed them to their core: elevated blood pressure spiking dangerously, cortisol levels through the roof from chronic stress, and signs of clinical exhaustion bordering on depressive collapse. Their recommendation was blunt, unsparing, delivered in the clipped tones of medical authority: immediate withdrawal from public duties, complete mental and physical rest enforced for months if not years, a regimen of therapy, medication and seclusion far from the madding crowd. The words abdication and health preservation began creeping into royal briefing papers circulated in secure folders. Memos stamped with eyes only that outlined contingency plans echoing those drawn up for Elizabeth in her twilight. But if the crisis was ostensibly medical, rooted in the frailties of a 77-year-old body pushed to its limits, it was far from isolated. A deeper rot, insidious and entrenched, had already taken hold in the palace foundations, corroding relationships and resolve alike. Sources close to the epicenter claimed that Charles had been wrestling with a second, more vicious war, one waged not on battlefields but behind palace doors, in the hushed arguments of marital bedrooms and council chambers. His relationship with Camilla, once hailed by royal romanticists as redemptive, the woman he loved through decades of scandal, the force of nature he called her in private letters, had begun to fray at the edges, threads pulling loose under relentless strain. Insiders described frequent blow-ups over the past year, eruptions as sudden as summer thunderstorms, disagreements on how to salvage the royal image battered by Harry's memoir Spare and Netflix scandals, clashes over Camilla's growing involvement in sensitive royal operations like patronages for literacy charities and osteoporosis campaigns that some felt encroached on traditional roles. Even petty spats over scheduling, with Camilla pushing for more joint appearances while Charles retreated inward. Tensions allegedly exploded during a private retreat at Highgrove in early 2025, where amid the manicured gardens Charles so cherished, Camilla cornered him with accusations of withholding the truth about his burgeoning abdication thoughts, her voice rising in a charge that reportedly left him speechless, slumped in an armchair, staring at the floor as if the weight of her words pinned him there. Adding inexorably to the mounting pressure, Princess Anne and Prince Edward, traditionally the silent, steadfast supporters of the crown, and the no-nonsense Princess Royal, who rode through the 2022 Platinum Jubilee on horseback at 71. Edward, the dutiful Duke of Edinburgh carrying his father's torch, allegedly began pushing for resolution not in the glare of public view, but in the private sanctums of family councils. They made it crystal clear, in urgent sibling summits convened away from prying ears, that the monarchy could not survive another season of instability. Not with Republican sentiments bubbling in Australia and Canada, not with Charles's every cough dissected online. Anne, described by one aide as ruthless in her realism, the woman who stared down kidnappers during a 1974 attempted abduction with steely, "Not now," reportedly warned her brother point-blank that hesitation could lead to public disillusionment on a scale unseen since Diana's death. Or worse, galvanise calls for Republican reform echoing the 1999 Australian referendum. And then came the foreign pressure, subtle yet suffocating, exerted through diplomatic backchannels rather than headlines. Diplomats from key allied nations, the United States amid its own political upheavals, staunch partners like Japan and India, quietly voiced concerns in encrypted cables about global political shifts. The grinding war in Europe with Russia's shadow lengthening, economic volatility from inflation spikes to supply chain snarls. The image of a faltering British monarch, captured in viral clips of Charles looking frail at COP summits, sent unintended shockwaves through sensitive international channels, undermining Britain's soft power at a time when alliances frayed. According to leaked memos obtained by investigative outlets, one senior ambassador from a Commonwealth realm directly questioned in a classified dispatch whether Charles possessed the stamina for the modern age's 24/7 demands, prompting furrowed brows in Whitehall. The palace didn't deign to reply publicly, but those barbed comments didn't go unnoticed, festering like an untreated wound. Faced with collapsing health that doctors charted in plummeting metrics, fractured relationships splintering the inner circle, internal dissent bubbling from siblings and staff, and rising international concern that chipped away at the crown's global luster, Charles stood precariously on a cliff edge buffeted by gales. Abdication was no longer a remote choice debated in hypotheticals. It was an inevitability, the only path to preserve the institution he had sworn to protect. And yet, for all the chaos swirling around him like a perfect storm, he made one decision in total, crystalline clarity amid the maelstrom. William would rise, not when the stars aligned perfectly, not when preparations were textbook flawless, but now, immediately, thrusting the throne into younger hands before the entire edifice crumbled. As Charles buckled behind the impenetrable walls of palace fortresses, retreating to private quarters where doctors monitored his vitals around the clock, an entirely different storm was brewing in Prince William's private circle at Kensington Palace, one so intimate and volatile that it could have jeopardized the entire precarious transfer of power, sending the monarchy into freefall. Sources close to Kensington Palace, those fly-on-the-wall observers who arrange flowers and fetch teas while absorbing every sigh, revealed that as William steeled himself to step into his father's enormous shoes worn by kings from Henry VII to Victoria, Catherine wasn't celebrating with champagne toasts or victory laps. She was crying, tears streaming in the privacy of her apartments, her composure cracking under the onslaught. The Princess of Wales, once Kate Middleton, the commoner who captivated a prince at university, reportedly broke down in heaving sobs after aides finally briefed her on the full, horrifying scope of what was hurtling toward them, not a gradual ascent, but an express elevator to the apex of power. Why wasn't she told earlier? Her inner circle wondered aloud in hushed tones, her exclusion a paternal decision by Charles to shield her until the die was cast. It was never supposed to happen this fast, this abruptly, like a train derailing at full speed. For Catherine, the seismic shift from devoted Duchess of Cambridge to future Queen Consort was always a distant drumbeat on the horizon, one she had mentally prepared for through protocol training and whispered palace seminars, but never truly confronted in its visceral immediacy, the loss of privacy, the elevation to icon status, the relentless hounding that felled Diana. The night the royal machinery lurched into high gear with Sandringham's decree, she was deliberately left out of the initial loop, informed only after William returned pale and resolute at dawn, his face a mask hiding turmoil. And when the truth finally reached her, delivered not gently over tea but in a barrage of operational briefings, it didn't arrive with kid gloves. Palace aides say she was utterly blindsided, overwhelmed by the sheer speed of the transition, like whiplash from zero to monarchy, and devastated by the gut-punch realization that her world, her children's world, had irrevocably changed without her consent or counsel. Behind the elegant walls of Kensington Palace, with its manicured gardens and nursery suites, she reportedly wept for hours on end, not out of petty resentment toward Charles or the crown, but out of primal fear, a mother's terror for the unknown. Fear for her three young children, Prince George, Princess Charlotte and Prince Louis, whose sheltered lives were about to be upended. Fear for her husband William. already battle-scarred by media intrusions, fear for the cozy family life in Adelaide Cottage that was now crumbling under the crushing weight of royal expectation, where playdates and school runs would yield to state banquets and security sweeps. One longtime aide described her as haunted, a ghost of her vibrant self, staring vacantly out a rain-streaked window as staff scrambled to reconfigure protocols. Security details ballooning overnight for what would now be a queen-in-waiting under constant siege. The shift meant far more than ceremonial titles etched in debrets. For little Prince Louis, the cheeky toddler waving from balconies, and Princess Charlotte, the poised mini-royal. Visibility would surge overnight like a tidal wave, cameras trained 24/7, every playground tumble headline fodder, expectations heaped on shoulders not yet broad enough. They would no longer be cocooned by the buffer of youth or physical distance from London. The world would claim them as future kings and queens. Catherine, ever a mother before anything else, recall her fierce protectiveness during her own cancer battle announced in 2024, voiced immediate, heartfelt concern to William about what this accelerated timeline would inflict on them, their innocence the first likely casualty in the monarchy's frantic new chapter, sacrificed on the altar of continuity. Sources also whisper that the emotional toll on Catherine wasn't solely about duty's demands or family fallout, her own health, something rarely dissected in public beyond her 2024 chemotherapy revelation and triumphant return, has reportedly been under quiet, vigilant observation by royal physicians. Subtle check-ins amid the stress. The weight of royal responsibility had already tested her stamina to its limits, mornings of nausea masked by smiles, nights of worry over public image. Now facing the Herculean role of queen consort under such abrupt, unforgiving conditions, those closest to her worry aloud in private whether she possesses the emotional bandwidth, the reservoir of resilience to endure the coming onslaught without shattering. And while William projected the steely composure expected of a future king, crisp suits, firm handshakes, measured words to the press, behind closed doors in their private quarters, he was torn asunder. A man rent between heart and heritage. On one hand, his father's crumbling condition, reports of hospital visits disguised as checkups, demanded decisive leadership, a son stepping up as kings before him had, on the other. His partner in every battle, the woman who stood by him through miscarriages and media storms, was struggling visibly, her tears a siren call to his protective instincts. Those within the innermost circle claim William was caught in a silent, savage war between safeguarding his nuclear family, the promise of normalcy he vowed to her at their 2011 wedding, and upholding the crown's ancient imperatives. Every step toward the throne, a heartbreaking step away from the life of barbecues and bike rides he had promised her in St. Andrews. Yet amid this churning chaos and raw heartbreak inside the family cocoon, one figure emerged from the lengthening shadows of Windsor. Determined to claw her way into influencing who truly wields the throne's power, her influence a wild card in the deck. When Camilla, queen consort, heard through a hurried aide's whisper that the abdication date had been finalized and inked, she was said to be staggered. Her composed facade fracturing like fine china under a hammer, eyes widening in the mirror of her vanity as the words sank in. But she wasn't done fighting, not by a long shot. In a tense private standoff that crackled with electricity, she reportedly made one final, desperate plea to Charles. Her voice a mix of velvet and venom: delay it, stop it outright, or risk everything they've built together unraveling into scandalous threads. She had always been at Charles's side through the tempests of scandal, the 1990s tampon tapes that scorched tabloids, the long wait post Diana's 1997 death, the rebuilding as Duchess of Cornwall through charity work and quiet loyalty, standing as his rock when the world bayed for blood. But this seismic decision, this abdication plotted in shadows, had been made without her input, her counsel dismissed like a junior lady-in-waiting. That was the deepest sting, a betrayal sharper than any divorce decree. Palace insiders say Camilla was blindsided by the abruptness of it all, learning of the irreversible abdication only hours before it was due to cascade into the public domain via press release. Her morning briefing at Clarence House interrupted by a paling equerry. Her fury wasn't just emotional, a wife's wounded pride. It was political, strategic, honed from years navigating royal treacherous waters. She believed, with fierce conviction, that she had earned an exalted place in the upper echelons of monarchy after decades as the other woman redeemed patronages for 100-plus organizations, bridging the generational gap with her humor at state events. Yet now her future was being swept aside in silence, her role as queen consort potentially diminished to footnote status. In a confrontation that reportedly erupted inside the echoing halls of Windsor Castle, amid tapestries depicting ancient conquests, Camilla cornered Charles with words as sharp as Excalibur. Desperate and unfiltered, a senior aide lingering in an antechamber to polish silver is said to have overheard raised voices piercing the air, Camilla accusing him of betrayal, of secrecy that echoed his youthful indiscretions, of undermining her years of unswerving loyalty through thick and thin. She allegedly demanded answers in a torrent, why now in the autumn of their lives, why without her his closest confidant? Why this path that threatened to erase her from history's pages before her legacy as queen could even take root in public memory? Her fear was unmistakable, palpable, a queen sensing her crown slipping, with Charles stepping down prematurely, her own titles, Queen Camilla, patron of literary giants like the Booker Prize, key royal figure in women's health, would be cast into uncertainty, her influence waning like twilight. There were fevered whispers that she'd already begun reaching out behind the scenes in a last-ditch bid for survival, privately contacting a trusted parliament liaison from her days as Duchess, hoping to secure assurances of a continued public role regardless of the transition's tempests, perhaps a life peerage or emeritus patronages. But time was a cruel adversary not on her side, and the royal machinery had already lurched beyond her control, pistons pumping with unstoppable momentum. Charles, however, stood his ground like the ancient oaks of his Highgrove Gardens, unmoved. According to those close to him, his private secretary, a valet of 20 years, his response was short, solemn, and final, delivered with the gravity of a deathbed vow. This is bigger than either of us. Camilla. Bigger than love, bigger than loyalty. He had made his choice not for Camilla's ambitions, not even solely for William's readiness, but for the survival of the institution itself. The firm that had endured plagues, world wars, and prime ministerial tyrannies. And that paramount duty meant walking away from personal bonds, even if it fractured everything around him into irreparable shards. What happens to Camilla now remains a tantalizing mystery, a subplot ripe for tabloid speculation. Some say she'll fade quietly into the background of Clarence House, retaining only ceremonial influence like a dowager duchess, tending gardens and grandchildren. Others believe she'll fight tooth and nail, publicly through interviews or privately via allies, to remain relevant in the new William era. But one thing is certain amid the uncertainty: the woman who once stood at the very heart of Charles's world, his soulmate through fire, has now found herself staring at a throne she may never truly touch again, her reflection distorted in its cold gold. But the tension didn't stop at the personal maelstrom engulfing Charles and Camilla, because the royal institution itself, the vast, labyrinthine apparatus of courtiers, constitutional lawyers, and protocol experts, is being torn apart from the inside out by forces more powerful than any family feud. Whispers are circulating like smoke through the vents of power about a secretive group of senior royals and government advisors known internally, in hushed code, as the Shadow Council, a cabal that's met in silence for months in unmarked rooms, and now it seems they've finally pulled the trigger on ending Charles's reign with surgical precision. This was never going to be just about one man's faltering decision, a solitary king's whim. It was orchestrated, calculated, inevitable. According to multiple palace insiders who have risked careers to speak, a hidden network began forming behind the scenes as early as late spring 2025. Its genesis in a discreet dinner at a Mayfair club far from palace eyes. Its members were not the usual faces beaming from palace balconies on state occasions, the glittering A-listers like William and Catherine, but an internal alignment of quiet, formidable power. Princess Anne with her military mind, Prince Edward the overlooked executor, a handful of non-public advisors whose names never grace headlines or society pages. Shadowy figures like the keeper of the privy purse and constitutional experts from Lincoln's Inn. They weren't seeking the spotlight's glare or public adulation. They were crafting contingency plans with the meticulousness of wartime strategists, wargaming scenarios over decanters of port. Their singular goal, as articulated in leaked minutes, was stability, the preservation of a 1,000-year-old institution teetering on knife edges. After Charles's multiple missteps, gaffes at climate summits, visible frailty at Remembrance Sunday, the Sussex exiles' lingering poison, they feared the monarchy could not afford a repeat of past turbulences like the 1992 annus horribilis of divorces and fire. Behind Balmoral's locked doors during the summer recess, away from cameras, courtiers, and the chattering press corps, they began holding what have now been retroactively referred to as shadow sessions, clandestine meetings in wood-panelled libraries, focused solely on the Crown's continuity, poring over polls showing youth disengagement and Republican upticks. The most stunning revelation to emerge from these leaks: by December 2025, this council had reportedly coalesced around a unanimous decision, their debates fierce but final. Sources claim they presented Charles with an ultimatum wrapped in velvet gloves: announce a structured transition plan forthwith, or risk being undermined internally through leaks, resignations, or subtle sabotage of his public image. While some pragmatists advocated for a soft transition phased into 2027, allowing time to groom William publicly, assuage Camilla's concerns with honours, and smooth political optics with Parliament, hardliners insisted on immediate action, arguing delay was death. The risk, they warned in grave tones over briefing binders, wasn't just in hesitation, it was in visibility, the slow bleed of relevance as every public stumble, a coughed speech at Davos, every cancelled appearance, a Balmoral fatigue, every emotional crack, a teary interview snippet, was documented, dissected on TikTok, and weaponized by anti-monarchists. Waiting, they argued, with data charts from YouGov polls, would only magnify instability, turning a dignified exit into a chaotic collapse. And Charles, though shaken to his core by the betrayal of siblings he trusted, did not resist their inexorable tide, according to those threaded into the council's web. He recognized the inevitable with a monarch's tragic clarity, nodding assent over tea. But the real twist, the dagger in the narrative, lies here. Prince William was allegedly never told the full extent of this internal orchestration, the puppet strings pulling his assent. While he had been briefed piecemeal on growing concerns, health bulletins, family strains, he did not know that his father had been cornered like a chess king in checkmate. That his rise was not purely a graceful torch-passing father to son, but one extracted by cold institutional necessity, a boardroom coup veiled in family piety. This shadow council didn't act out of malice or personal ambition, they insist in anonymous briefings. In their eyes, they were the monarchy's immune system, protecting it from implosion under Charles's enfeebled watch. But their secrecy now casts a long, ominous shadow over what the public swallowed as a personal abdication, a heartfelt choice. It raises a harrowing, existential question that gnaws at the nation's soul. Was King Charles truly stepping down on his own volition, a king choosing his moment? Or was he quietly, methodically pushed out by those who swore oaths to serve him, the very guardians now reshaping the throne in their image? But as the institution wrestled for control in smoke-filled sessions and encrypted memos, the outside world responded with a deafening wave of emotion, a cacophony that drowned out palace spin. And not all of it was the fawning support of yore. Crowds swelled organically outside Buckingham Palace from dawn, a human tide pressing against barriers. Some waved Union Jacks with fervent cheers, others wept openly, clutching photos of Charles. A few bold protesters unfurled banners decrying the stolen crown. The nation is split down the middle in its visceral reaction to the abdication. Polls flashing on screens showing 52% approval for William, 48% dismay at Charles's exit. From the precise moment the official statement hit at 10:17 a.m. GMT, every major news outlet, from the BBC's somber anchors to Sky News' ticker frenzy, CNN's global panels to Al Jazeera's geopolitical lens, erupted into round-the-clock coverage, helicopters hovering, experts dissected in studios, public opinion hotlines jammed with calls. Some pundits hailed it as a bold, necessary evolution for a monarchy grown tired under the weight of an aging king's stumbles. Others thundered it as betrayal incarnate, an abandonment of sacred duty sworn in Westminster Abbey, a reckless disruption of continuity that mocks Queen Elizabeth's 70-year endurance. On social media, the divide ignited a full-scale firestorm, algorithms fueling the blaze. Hashtags trended globally within minutes, #LongLiveWilliam rocketing to 1 billion impressions with fan edits of Kate and Will's, countered savagely by Not My King surging with equal viral force. Memes of Charles as a weary Atlas dropping his globe. Campaigns launched within hours on Change.org and Twitter Spaces, some celebrating the dawn of a youthful, progressive royal chapter with William's eco-warrior vibe and Catherine's relatable glamour. Others raging that this had all been engineered from palace shadows, without a whisper of public consent, petitions demanding a referendum on the monarchy's survival. The crown had shifted on its axis, but the people hadn't moved as one united chorus. Discord reigned. What's more revealing, more prophetic, is the generational fault line now fully exposed like a geological strata. Younger audiences. Gen Z scrolling TikTok in universities from Manchester to Melbourne, long disengaged from stuffy royal tradition with its curtsies and corgis, suddenly rallied around William and Catherine as beacons of progress, a sleek break from outdated formality. Embodying mental health advocacy, William's heads together, and modern family amid climate crises. But among older loyalists, the silver-haired stalwarts who queued 10 deep for Elizabeth's lying-in state, sentiment curdled bitter as oversteeped tea. Charles had waited 7 decades in the wilderness, enduring public scorn as the other man, only for a mere 4-year reign to end prematurely. Pushed aside, they believed, by a toxic brew of internal politics, emotional vulnerability, and shadow council machinations. Then came the political echoes reverberating through Westminster and beyond, amplifying the quake. In Scotland, SNP leaders like Humza Yousaf seized the moment, calling urgent Holyrood debates on the monarchy's relevance in a devolved union, reigniting quiet murmurs of independence with a subtle, pointed warning laced in subtext. In Wales, Plaid Cymru voices echoed similar calls for reassessing oaths in a modern nation, the dragon banner twitching. This abdication may ripple with symbolic consequences far beyond Buckingham's gates, fracturing the fragile UK mosaic. Meanwhile, England witnessed a contrasting fervour. Pro-William rallies sprouted spontaneously across cities from Birmingham to Bristol. Crowds in the thousands holding illuminated signs proclaiming "Future begins now," chanting rhythmic slogans for change, strength, hope, a sea of faces seeing William not as rote continuation but a phoenix rising, a fresh start to redefine royalty in an unstable world of AI upheavals, trade wars, and pandemics lingering. Yet, just blocks away from those jubilant gatherings, pockets of protesters hunkered with placards bearing haunting messages: "This wasn't our choice," "People's voice over palace plots," their megaphones blaring dissent, a microcosm of national schism. And that's the profound tragedy at the pulsing heart of it all, the question that transcends pomp. For all the orchestrated power transitions, the formal ceremonies scripted in vellum, the carefully managed headlines spun by spin doctors, one query echoed louder than cathedral bells. Who really decides the direction of the monarchy in this democratic age? Is it hoary tradition codified in 1689's Bill of Rights? Is it the crown wearer alone? Or is it the people, the sovereign subjects whose taxes fund the firm's £100 million annual bill?